So I had one mask when I was at church. I had one mask when I was at school. I had one mask when I was on the football field. And so this abuse went on for 8 years, and it just got worse and worse towards the end. And he had tried to kill me and my brother numerous times. I kind of felt like Cinderella, where every day I got to go to the ball, and the ball was going to work because I had freedom, and I lived vicariously through my customers because no one knew what my brother and I had to experience when we went back to that apartment. And in June of 1999, it was a Monday night, we had gotten home. And
hey, welcome back to another episode of Cold Red. I'm Ray Carr, and with me always is Fitz. Hey, Jim.
Hi, Ray. Tell us about our guest tonight.
Today we have a special guest with us, a public speaker and prison reform advocate, David Garlock. David, it's a pleasure having you on the show today, and thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you for the invitation, and I look forward to our conversation.
Well, here on Cold Red, we usually have guests with backgrounds in law enforcement, but David, you have a unique story. And David was formerly an incarcerated inmate who now works with prisoners as they try and re-enter into society. I think for the best thing for us as we do this is to give you the floor, David, and explain to us, to our listeners, what happened and what caused your incarceration.
Yeah, I mean, my incarceration is not a typical story that you would read in the newspaper. My brother and I, we grew up in a very dysfunctional home. Our dad and mom were really unfit, always arguing, fighting. One of my earliest memories was when I was 5 years old. My brother and I were hiding underneath our kitchen table, and my dad was threatening to kill my mom and sister with the hacksaw blade. And my grandma had to call the police, and he was arrested and taken to a psych ward. And, just total dysfunction. My sister was kicked out of the house when she was 11 years old because of just the way that they couldn't get along. My parents got divorced when I was 9, and that was really one of the catalysts that changed the whole trajectory of my brother and my life. And she actually got custody of us for 4 months and lost it because she was an unfit mother. We probably went to school 8 times in that 4-month period, and our apartment almost burned down, and she lost custody. And we went and stayed with our uncle and aunt for about 6 months, and then went back with our dad. And it was really when we went with our dad that things spiraled. My brother was actually kicked out of the house because he was smoking marijuana and drinking a lot. And when he was kicked out, he actually went to a group home, and we were in Seattle, Washington at this time. And there was a gentleman that just got out of prison in South Carolina and met the person running the group home just so he could have access to young boys. And it was then that he started molesting my brother. This went on for about 2 months in the home, and then he forced my brother to move in with him. And probably about 2 months after that, he had the idea to take my brother down to California, where my mom and stepdad were living, and talk them into moving up to Washington. And that whole thing was just so he could have access to me. So the first time that I saw my mom in 2 years, it was January 1st, 1991. The first 3 hours was great, because I'm catching up, seeing my mom, because I hadn't seen her in so long. And then the gentleman's like, hey, let's go play hide and go seek. And as an 11-year-old, that's what you do. So we went downstairs in the basement, and we were playing hide and go seek. And this gentleman found me. And there wasn't any hoopla, anything. And that's when he started molesting me. And when he was done, he told me that if I ever told anybody, he would kill my family and me. And so that, just changed the whole thought process I had about everything that was going on. And it was really, one thing I talk about is that the trauma that I endured and the abuse, I had to create these different masks to survive. So I had one mask when I was at church. I had one mask when I was at school. I had one mask when I was on the football field. And so this abuse went on for 8 years, and um, it just got worse and worse towards the end. And he had tried to kill me and my brother numerous times. We had ended up going from Washington to California to Nevada to Louisiana, and then finally ended up in Alabama in 1999. And this gentleman, he would stand outside where my brother and I were working, and just watching what we were doing. And if we were flirting with the waitress, if we were flirting with a customer, when we got home, we got the crap beat out of us, you know. And I actually, I looked so forward to going work to every day because it was like an escape, you know. I was thinking the other day, I kind of felt like Cinderella, you know, where every day I got to go to the ball and the ball was going to work because I had freedom, you know. And I live vicariously through my customers because no one knew what my brother and I had to experience when we went back to that apartment. And in June of 1999, it was a Monday night. We had gotten home, and an irrational decision was made, and we took the gentleman's life. And a lot of times, you know, people ask, like, how could you do something like that? And I'm like, in psychology, you know, it's seeing red. It's that point where you just are filled with so much rage and hatred and anger and animosity. And that's how the murder happened. And it took them 4 months to find the body, you know, and that was some of the hardest time of my life because here it is. I was living with the fact that I had taken somebody's life. And I mean, I was high, I was drunk, I was high or drunk just to get through that whole time.
You know, Dave, if you could, you know, you're at this time, you're 19 years old, correct?
Yes. When the murder happened, I was 19.
And how old was your brother?
He's 22.
All right. So I just want to take a step back, you know, because I know our listeners are thinking, how did this individual force your brother to go and live with him? How did he do that? What was used to make that happen?
It was the manipulation and the threats of killing them, killing my brother, killing myself, you know, and just and when we were both there too, he actually pitted us against each other so we wouldn't come together. And that was just his manipulation and his tactics to keep control, you know. Something that I never really thought about until I was actually at my pardon hearing in 2021 was one of the people on the pardon board actually said, would you consider this like a domestic violence situation, you know? And I'm like, I never thought of it in that way, you know, but in actuality, you know, if you look at all the components, you know, it had all the components of like a domestic violence situation, even though we weren't in the relationship willingly.
You know, and I know you want to say something here, Jim. I just want to go here real quick. You know, you said it was a Monday night and you came home from work and you and your brother made a decision that you were going to end this. Did it just happen all of a sudden, or was there talk between you and your brother about how you were going to make this end? Things like this in my line of work never happen on a whim. There's usually progression, especially you said everything was building up in you and building up in your brother over time, what this individual was doing. But you're 19, your brother's 22. You guys in your own right are men. So how is it that this individual had such a stronghold on you at that time as well?
It was still the manipulation, you know, and just the threats of killing us. You know, there was a situation in Louisiana when we were working. All three of us were working at a restaurant there. I had a 4-top. It was 3 young ladies and a guy, and I was flirting with the girls. and I was going into the restroom to count my tips and use the restroom. And when I went in, he came in. He grabbed me by the neck and started choking me, pushed me against the paper towel dispenser. And the next thing I know is he's punching me to bring me back to consciousness. And I mean, it's situations like that where I knew that he would bring those threats to reality, where he would kill us. And it was just those constant things where he would manipulate us, and keep us apart, where we wouldn't come together, because he knew that if we came together, that we'd be able to overpower him. The night of the murder, I mean, both of us had been drinking. I don't know how much my brother had drank when I got home, but I had 2 drinks, and my drinks were like 95% vodka and just a little bit of Coke so it wouldn't burn. And that was my coping mechanism to deal with the abuse and deal with whatever was going to happen that night.
Your abuser, and you mentioned that he at one time was in prison, correct?
Yes.
What was he in prison for?
He never really told us what he was in prison for, and we never really asked. It was just something that he used kind of to continue to keep that fear in us.
Did you ever find out afterwards what his background was about in reference to him? How he was able to maintain that control over you?
No, we never did. When we pled out to the offense, his adopted father was there when we were signing the plea deal, and it just seemed like he knew what Ray was about, and he wasn't sad. He just accepted the fact that he was gone. It wasn't a typical, like, you lost somebody that you cared about. And that was something that was kind of shocking, because I thought that there might have been some tears, might have been some more feelings shown, but I really believe that the person knew what the abuser was like.
There's an ongoing question of life imitating art or art imitating life. David, I'm not sure how much of a reader you are of contemporary novels. I just finished reading Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver, and I'm familiar with Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. It almost sounds like your story could be a combination of those two. People growing up, in some case, rural, but certainly in a dysfunctional sort of family situation where parents come and go, and boyfriends and exes and mothers. You don't meet your mother or grandmother till later in life. And it unfortunately for you, I wonder if some of these authors have read your story in the media and then built their little novels about it and around it. So I feel for you in that regard. And you weren't asked to be born into this, as you described, the dysfunctional family that you were. And then this guy comes into your life at about 11 years of age, if I heard you right. And it seems like his grooming process was basically within a few hours take you downstairs and scare the shit out of you. Basically say he's going to kill you if you tell anyone what's been going on. So sometimes grooming will go on for months, even a year or two, with certain types of these molesters, these offenders. But this guy, he didn't waste any time at all. He put the fear of God, if not the fear of death, into you. And that's how he got his way with you and obviously his brother. Not all that unusual. Ray, I know you know this. We've seen other situations like this, but this guy didn't waste any time. He got right to business, and unfortunately, you and your brother had to pay a long-term price there. May I ask? We don't have to get graphic here, but I'm sure it's a matter of public record. What was your method of operations, your MO, in terms of taking him out?
We used knives.
Okay. And we can leave it at that.
You said you used a knife. Is that right?
Yeah.
So after you were done, was there any thought about what are we going to do? What do we do? I mean, did you guys talk about this before you did it? or is
No,
this?
I mean we really didn't have any conversation or anything about what we were gonna do, and I mean everything that happened was just spontaneous, and even when the murder actually happened, I didn't even think anything was gonna happen. But like I said, I mean I was just filled with all that rage and hatred and animosity, and that's when the murder happened. And we didn't have a core or anything, so we couldn't really dispose of the body. So we had just buried it in the backyard, buried him in the backyard with the everything that we cleaned up.
So with that, there's a period of time, you said like 4 months, right?
Yeah.
That's by the time they find him. What's going on in that time period with you and your brother? Is there questions coming at you? You were staying in his house, correct?
No, I mean it wasn't really his house at this. It was an apartment that we were renting in this house that had three apartments. So we had the back apartment. In the place we were, Jasper, Alabama, we had just moved there like 9 months previously. So really none of us had made any roots. My brother and I probably knew more people there because we worked at the local Shoney's. People had asked where he went. We had told everybody he just packed up and went back to Ohio because that's where he was from. And so, with us not being from the area and not really having roots and people really worried about him, there wasn't a whole lot of hoopla and like investigation into where he went.
Yes.
And probably probably a week after the murder, my brother actually left the area because he met him and one of the girls, one of the waitresses, decided to leave together.
When you committed the act, and now you're disposing of this individual, were you concerned because you're in an apartment? And I'm sure that down in Alabama, I'm not. I don't know what the land looks like, but is there people on top of you? Is there people right next to you? Were you concerned about being discovered?
So it was a house. It was
Okay.
a house that was turned into an apartment, and so we had the back,
Okay.
like room, living room, dining room, and room. So and the houses next door were still a ways away, so we really weren't too concerned with that. And it was like 2 a.m. when we were out there, so um, there was some concern as far as somebody coming out and saying something, but we didn't feel like anybody would because it was 2 a.m.
So what transpires in those days? What's going through your mind? You're going to work every day and everything, you go right back to normal. Is there any behavior on your end where you're kind of on edge? Do people see any changes in you?
I mean, I think the change that people saw in me was that I could now be the 19-year-old that I was supposed to be. I wasn't, on edge all the time. I was able to do stuff. I was able to go out with them and party and do things like that where I wasn't before, where all I did was come in and I worked and went home. So now they got to experience David, not the shell that just went to work and came home, and experienced the abuse. So, I mean, it was kind of like I viewed it where the motto sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I viewed that that's what my life was, where I was actually able to be this 19-year-old, like other 19-year-olds.
In Alabama. Interesting. Did your this, you called him a gentleman? I'm not going to use that word because it doesn't sound like one to me. But he was obviously having sexual interactions with you and your brother. But was he covering his tracks, like dating women? Would he ever spend time? I know in the early days there was when you first met him, but how about when you finally moved to Alabama? Was there like a girlfriend he'd keep on the side, or just strictly you guys?
There were here and there. I mean, that's actually he would pick some like overweight people that really weren't getting a lot of attention and stuff like that, and so he would use them and manipulate them in the same way. That's how we were actually going from Louisiana to we were actually going from Louisiana up to Ohio, and we got stranded in Birmingham and then moved to Jasper. And that's what was happening. You know, he had met this girl at the bowling alley that we were working at. We had two jobs. We were working at the city of Kenner in Louisiana and a bowling alley. And he met this heavier woman that really wasn't getting a lot of interest from guys and just manipulated her, you know. And so he would always find individuals that had very low self-esteem and that he could play his mind games with and manipulate.
Sounds like a classic psychopath, manipulator, narcissist, doesn't care about anyone else and lies, and of course a con man. So I'm not sure if he's ever diagnosed as such, but he certainly comes across that way. And I ask you those questions because for someone out there today, these guys still exist, and they're out there, and they're abusing young boys or young girls, and then they have these, what do they call them, beards, if they pretend it's a woman that's kind of in their life, but that's really just a front, a facade to keep having their young boys. He's obviously a pedophile, is a little bit younger, but he didn't actually stay at a certain age. As you aged, he still molested you, correct?
Yeah.
And some of these people are preferential offenders where they only want kids like 11 to 13 years old. Then once the kids get older, they're bored with that and they move on to other 11 or 13 year olds. But this guy had access to you, and in the worst of ways, and you had to, of course, live with that. And that became a part of your normal in a way. I hate to use that term, but like you said, when he was finally gone after the murder, you could kind of finally be yourself for the first time, the good and the bad of that. And in a way that must have been, the shackles were off you for the first time in almost a decade. Until they came back on you 4 months later.
But I mean, even with that 4-month period, you know, it still felt like I was in a prison, because I was a prison in my own mind because I had taken somebody's life. And whenever there'd be times where we drive by this house, you know, and I would like instinctively just like try to see if I could look behind, you know. I know I couldn't see all the way back to where the body was buried, but it was just that instant, like, has anybody found the body, you know?
I think both Ray and I want to move on to the next. I know you divided your life into like 8 stages or phases, if I read that right. But
Jim, before you go there, I want to just hit one more thing, if it's okay. Dave,
so did I. So
yeah, I'm sorry, Jim. I didn't mean to interrupt you. But Dave, when this 4 months is going on, in that 4 months, you have a pretty good story here. Yeah, this guy, he was transient. He went back to Ohio, where he was from, and your brother took off, and he was gone for a while, and you're just going to work. What attracted the police to you about this missing person?
That was my question. Great minds think alike. Go.
It was where the body was found and everything, and we were the last residents back there, and so that's why on October 29th, 1999, it was a Friday night at 9:00 when they came in and wanted to talk to me about the body that they found. And at first, I was just like doing some small talk and everything, and they interrogated me for about 4 hours that first night, and I partially confessed to it. And then I was taken to the county jail, Walker County Jail, and booked in on a murder charge. And I had just turned 20, like 24 days previously. So that was really hard to think that here I am 20 years old. And in Alabama, I know that they're really good at giving the death penalty and life without parole. And that's really what I thought I was going to get. So that first weekend I was incarcerated, I was just crying myself to sleep because I thought that I was going to get the death penalty, and the the way that Alabama executed people was with the electric chair, and they had a nickname for it called Yellow Mama, and so that's what I thought was going to happen.
Well, how did they come to go into the backyard where you buried this person and find him? What led them there? Do you know?
Well, this so I really don't talk about this. This is going to be in the book that I'm writing. So I mean that this is a part.
Okay.
So people will have to read the book to really see how the body was found.
Okay, all right,
Fair enough.
That's fair. I like that. So you go to jail. So tell us about that trial phase. How does that come? Do you admit to it? Do you plead to it, or do you go through a trial?
Yeah, so I was taken back to the city jail for more questioning on November 1st, 1999, and I was sat in an interrogation room for 7 hours by myself. They gave me 2 packs of cigarettes, which probably lasted 25 minutes.
Oh boy!
And I only needed one lighter, one light, and I smoked the 2 packs just like that, and I hadn't smoked all weekend, and just the stress and just being in this situation. And finally, after 7 hours, I had a lot of time to think. I was thinking about the abuse. I was thinking about the murder. I was thinking about everything that transpired. And I finally called the detective in, and I confessed. I told him everything that happened, and that was a big weight that was taken off my chest, because here's the first time that I'd ever told anybody about the abuse. Here's the first time that I'd really told anybody about the murder. And it was so freeing and relieving. And they came in, they videotaped it. He handcuffed me, took me down to his car. We were heading back to the county jail. I'm asking him, am I going to get the death penalty? Am I going to get life without parole? And he turns to me. He's like, do you believe in God? I'm like, am I going to get the death penalty, life without parole? And he's like, do you believe in God? I'm like, am I going to get the death penalty, life without parole? He's like, do you believe in God? And I finally told him, I'm like, yeah, I believe in God. And he's like, you need to seek him now. And that conversation just changed the whole trajectory of my life, because it was then I went back, got a New Testament Bible from the jailer, and read in Revelations, and got to Revelations 3:20 that says, behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone opens the door and allows me to come in, I will come in and sup with him and he with me. And I just cried out to God, and this peace came over me. And I knew that the doors weren't going to open right there, but I knew that things were going to be okay. My brother and I in Walker County, Alabama, they don't have public defenders, which is horrible. So there's only 5 counties in Alabama that have public defenders. The other counties, you have court-appointed lawyers. So these are defense attorneys that have to do a certain amount of court-appointed cases a year. So we got 2 court-appointed lawyers that were really pitiful. They didn't want to do anything for us. Later on, when Brian Stevenson and Equal Justice Initiative started working with us, they looked in our cases and they found so many discrepancies and reasons that there could have been appeals for inefficient counsel. But because of the time limit, we couldn't appeal it. But they came to us, and the lawyers told us the only thing that the DA would offer is a 25-year plea deal. We'd already confessed to it, so we knew that we couldn't take it to trial because we'd be found guilty. There was one thing that I found in the law books about this thing called youthful offender status in Alabama. So if you're under 21 and you commit an offense, you can apply for this status. And so I asked my lawyer about it. He's like, oh, they're not going to give it to me. I'm like, are you still going to put me in for it? He's like, no, they're not going to put you in for it. They're not going to give it to you. So for like 4 months, I had to go back and forth with him just to see if he would put me in for this youthful offender status. Finally, he's like, yes, I'll put you in. So I went before the judge. The judge denied the motion. And then he laughed and he said, rehabilitation is a 70-year-old joke. And I was like, wow, this is the judge who is supposed to technically believe that prisons are about corrections and rehabilitation, saying that they're not. So I knew we were pretty much in trouble then.
Was
You
your
didn't
brother
exactly
going through
have.
something? Go ahead, Jim. Go ahead, Jim.
I was going to say you didn't exactly have Atticus Finch from To Kill a Mockingbird as your attorney, so in a small southern town, and that's sad to hear there. But yeah, I think Ray and we're probably thinking the same way. How did your brother, was he have to be extradited from Ohio, or how did he get brought back into the scene?
So my brother he didn't go to Ohio. My brother ended up being in Florida. And so they extradited him from Florida. They arrested him like 3 weeks after I was arrested. And the thing that let them know that we were telling the truth is I hadn't talked to my brother since he left. So it had been about 4 months that I had seen or talked to my brother. And when he was arrested in Florida, our testimonies were 100% alike. So it wasn't the point where I was able to call him and be like, hey, I'm in the county jail. This is what you need to tell them. It's like, no, our testimonies are exactly alike because we couldn't talk. Plus, it was 99. We didn't have cell phones and things like that.
That's true.
Ray, if you and I were independently interviewing these both brothers, we'd be pretty convinced that they were telling the truth if we could confirm they haven't been in touch with each other. So that would add a lot to the interview aspects of the whole thing.
Yeah, I'm a little bothered. I'm a little bothered by the judge that he had initially making that statement. They're supposed to be impartial, and they're supposed to judge everything on its merits based upon the law. And he didn't appear to do that. Maybe he was he much older?
Yeah, he was about 75. And I mean, there were all kinds of rumors about things that was going on too, but that's probably a whole another episode and everything.
Well, we'd love to have you back. So, I mean, if you want to talk about something like that, that'd be great.
When the book comes out.
Exactly. When the book comes out, we'll definitely bring you back.
But another thing that was really baffling about, like, when my lawyer came up to me and was like, hey, the only thing they're going to offer you is 25-year sentence, is he told me, he's like, hey, if you have to do all 25 years, you'll just be a young 45 when you get out. And I'm just like, I was 21 years old when he told me that. It's like, I'm 44 right now. Just to think that, I mean, I would still be in prison till October 27, 2024 if I didn't make parole and get out when I did. It's just like baffling to just sit there and just think about that comment and what he said.
There's a lot of stories about prison life and what it's like. And nobody really, even though Jim and I worked numerous cases, have been in hundreds of prisons throughout our career, interviewing people and doing different things. It's not the same thing as living there. What was it like for a young man of your age to be in a setting like that? Tell our listeners what it was like to be in prison.
Well, I mean, I was in a couple different prisons. So when we first went in, we went down to Kilby Correctional Facility. So that was the intake prison. And what's very interesting about that is we were in quarantine for 3 days. And really what the COs, or some of the COs, what they wanted to do was just instill this unrealistic fear in you. There was this 16-year-old kid that got 2 20-year sentences for robbery, and the CO got in his face and was just yelling at him and telling him that he's not supposed to be in prison. He's supposed to be at home with his mom and this and that, and this kid was just crying there, and then another day they were coming in for count time and he's like, oh yeah, we got somebody in here, murder in the first, 21-year-old. And I know that he was talking about me. So it was definitely interesting just to see how some of these COs interacted. I'd
Correctional
actually
officers, by
just
the way, for our
correction
listeners.
officers.
Yeah, yeah. Mhm.
I had actually just shaved my head like 2 or 3 days before I went down to prison, and there was actually this black correction officer that grabbed me by the shirt and just pushed me up against the wall. He's like, "You're a skinhead. You're a skinhead. You're a racist." I'm like, "No, I'm not. I just shaved my head." He's like, "I'm gonna be watching you. I'm gonna be watching you." And he like watched me for like 3 or 4 days, to see how I acted, and if I was racist, and he actually apologized later because he saw that I wasn't. But in prison, one thing that really surprised me, especially in prisons in Alabama, is about like the gangs. Um, so you had your typical gangs like your Crip, your Folk, your Insane Gangsta Disciples. There's like 20 different gangs there in Alabama. Then you had your Aryan Nation and your Southern Brotherhood. But the thing that really baffled me about Alabama is that individuals would ride with their city over their gang. So that was something that really baffled me because I thought that if you had a Crip from Huntsville, Montgomery, and Birmingham, that all the Crips would ride together, but they would actually ride with their city over their gang. So that was something that really baffled me. The correctional officers are definitely very interesting. I always tell people that, in my opinion, there's three different types of corrections officers. You have your by the books corrections officer. This is the one that, in Alabama, I could get written up because my hair was too long right now. So my hair is probably about 2.5 inches. You'd have to only have it like an inch and a half or else you could get written up. But you respected these correction officers because they're by the books. They don't change. Every day, Monday through Friday, they're the same thing. You know what to expect. Then you have your correction officer that is like an incarcerated person. They're just sitting around playing dominoes. At times, they're fellow gang members, stuff like that. And they're just there chilling, doing 8 hours. But then you have your wishy-washy CO. Corrections officer. This is the one that on Monday will bring in a cell phone to you, get $500 from your girlfriend, but on Friday they're coming down to shake you down and gonna write you up because they found you with the cell phone. And so there's a lot that you have to navigate. You have to navigate corrections officers. You have to navigate the people that you're doing time with. A lot of the prisons I was at, they were dorms instead of cells. So these dorms were actually created to house like 60 people, but we had 136 people living in these areas. 5 toilets, 7 showers. So there's really no free space. You're constantly right next to somebody. But what's very interesting is it can be very lonely. You could be in the dorm with 135 people and still be alone because of whatever you're experiencing in life, the loss of family members, different things like that. While I was incarcerated, my mom, my dad, my grandma, and sister all passed away. And so I had to navigate being incarcerated, dealing with those losses, and not being able to go to funerals, not being able to really correspond with my family to really know what's happening.
Wow. Was there a hierarchy in prison? I mean, we've always heard over the years if you're a cop killer, you're on the top shelf. But of course, it also depends what gang you may be in. Of course, if you're a little kid rapist, you're on the bottom of the hierarchical rung. You're quote unquote a murderer. I'm not sure if you joined any gangs at all, just for self-preservation. But how did that whole sort of dynamic work out?
No, I mean, I didn't join any gangs at all. I affiliated with people, but I wasn't with any gangs. I'm 100% extroverted, so I got along with everybody. One thing that is really a key in prison is respect. So if you show respect, you'll get respect. People knew my faith, knew what I stood for. And that wasn't stuff that was challenged. And I played sports a lot, so I was involved in a lot of different things. In Alabama, the sports are like this. White folks play volleyball, black folks play basketball, and if you want to play softball, anybody can play softball. And if you're a white person, if you want to play basketball, you better be good and you better be willing to take some hard fouls. I busted my eye open, busted the back of my head, lost a tooth, separated shoulder, messed up ankles and everything. But I would constantly go back out there and play, and they're like, man, you are one crazy white dude, But, I mean, I love playing sports, and it was wonderful opportunities to just create those relationships, and just to another area to gain that respect. But as far as like a hierarchy, yeah, there's definitely a hierarchy. And what's always interesting about that hierarchy is, like you said, people who've committed murder, they're like top dogs, they're at the top rung. But once everybody gets out of prison, where does that person go? They're now on the bottom of the ladder because now they're looked at as a monster. You took somebody's life. There's no way that anybody's going to look at you and give you any type of high standing. So it's definitely interesting the way that ladder changes once you get out of prison.
Absolutely.
You mentioned somebody, an attorney by the name of Brian Stevenson.
Yeah, just for our listeners, it's pretty cool, huh?
Yeah, just for our listeners, Brian Stevenson is from Southern Delaware. He born and raised, grew up, and went to Harvard, and wound up going down to Alabama to practice law. And tell us a little bit about what he did and how you come to meet him.
Yeah, so one of the folks that I was incarcerated with was actually a client of Brian's, and he told him about my brother and me, and they wanted to start working with us. As I said, they started looking into our case and really the whole meat and potatoes, and then they realized that the appeal time had expired, so they couldn't do anything there. But what they wanted to do was help with the parole process. Probably the second or third visit I had with Brian, he started telling me about Eastern University. So Eastern University is a Christian college outside of Philadelphia where he got his undergrad at. So he went to Eastern before he went to Harvard. And I was like, wow, okay, this sounds pretty cool. And then I got some flyers from Eastern, and they talked about that they had a prison ministry and a street ministry. I was like, okay, I'm sold. I want to go up there. But, the process was going on. My brother actually got out of prison in 2008. In 2009, I went up for parole, and the attorney general was trying to get reelected. And so anybody who had a violent offense or anybody who had committed a sexual offense was being set off. So I was set off 5 years. But Brian and Equal Justice Initiative was able to get a 2-year cut. So I came up for parole in February of 2013, made it, and was released April 1st, 2013. So what is April 1st?
April Fools. Tell me what happened.
So in Alabama, when you make parole, everybody leaves on Monday on parole. If you end your sentence, otherwise you leave whenever. But if you make parole, you always leave on Monday morning. So Friday, I did blood work, I did paperwork, I did everything. I had all my ducks in a row. I was ready to go. 7:30 Monday morning, April 1st, I go to the shift office. I'm like, hey, David Garlock, ready to go. They're like, Garlock, your paperwork hasn't come in. You can't go home. I was like, okay. You guys know I love to joke around and play and do all that, but my freedom is not something I want to joke around about right now. They put this on for like 10 minutes talking about like your paperwork hasn't come, you can't go. And I'm just like, this is not cool. This is not. And then finally they're like, okay, go get dressed and get up out of here. And as I'm walking out to go I'm like, how can you joke around about somebody's freedom like that? That is not even cool.
There are lines that should not be crossed, and I think that was one of them. even for 10 minutes.
Absolutely.
Well, there's another thing you did with Brian. Tell us about that.
You're talking about the movie?
Yeah, was that when you were still in prison or out of prison?
No, that happened afterwards. So Brian Stevenson wrote a book called Just Mercy that came out in 2014. Pretty much the main basis of the book is about one of his cases, Walter McMillian, who was a gentleman in Alabama that was put on death row for committing a murder that he didn't commit. He was accused of killing a white woman in a very racially motivated county in Alabama. And so he was on death row for 6 years. And Brian won his case and helped get him released. And then some of his other cases are throughout the book too. So in 2018, it actually became, they were filming it. And so Michael B. Jordan, Jamie Foxx, Brie Larson, O'Shea Jackson Jr., and others were in it. So I got a call from Brian in August of 2018. It's like, hey, I got a pretty cool opportunity for you. I'm like, okay. He's like, do you want to be in a movie? I'm thinking to myself, do you actually have to ask somebody if they want to be a movie? It's just like, tell me where I need to be, what I need to be wearing and dressed up. I was like, yeah, I'd love that. So we went down September 5th of 2018 to film. So most of it was filmed in Atlanta. It was filmed in Tyler Perry Studios, or where we filmed was at the old Cobb County Jail outside of Atlanta. So we go to the set and everything. Brian is always about changing the narrative. And so there were 4 incarcerated people in this movie, and Brian wanted 4 of his clients to play these roles instead of 4 actors. And so I was one of the clients chosen. But yeah, you said, wow, Fitz, but wait till this. When we got on set, we didn't have scripted lines. Each one of us got to share our story for 18 to 20 minutes. So the 3 lines I have in the movie are actually parts of my own story. And two of the lines I've already shared in this podcast.
What are they?
Where the judge laughed and said rehabilitation was a 70-year-old joke, and where my lawyer said if I had to do all 25 years, I'll be a young 45. And then the other line was how I talked about how pitiful my court-appointed lawyer was.
Yeah, I can only imagine.
They would be money lines in a movie that you're describing. So that's an amazing story there. But while in prison, you were also you attained further education and degrees. You were involved, of course, in a ministry. Tell us a little bit about that and what that did for you, as well as other inmates.
Yeah, so I was able to get my GED in the county jail. After my experience with God, I told myself that I was going to do the time instead of letting the time do me. And so I told myself whatever opportunities I had, I was going to take advantage of. So I got my GED in the county jail. I was able to get a drafting trade through Wallace Community College and got a master's of theology through an unaccredited Christian college outside of Georgia. And yeah, I was involved in church and just different avenues there. I wasn't the type of person that was just going to go around and try to convert everybody. My idea of ministering to folks is just allowing conversations to happen and just to loving on people, because that's the best way. I feel that there were too many people just trying to go out there and evangelize everybody. And I was always like, okay, God's going to open up opportunities for me to talk to people. There's going to be situations where something's going to happen, and I'm going to be given that opportunity to talk to them, to encourage them, to help them in their time of need. And he always allowed those opportunities.
Amazing. David, I may ask you,
go, Jim.
You're next, right? We'll go back and forth here. He's so fascinating. For parole to be granted, usually you have to show that you have, besides you're good in, good time in prison and all that, you have to show that you have somewhere to live and perhaps a job, right? Was there a halfway house involved, or basically when the day you walked, that Monday, April Fool's Day, when you walked out of the joint, where did you go? And was there, I'm sure you still had supervision after that. You had to report to a parole officer. They go by different names now. But how did that whole process work?
Yeah, so I went through Equal Justice Initiative's post-release education program, and so they actually had a studio apartment ready for me when I got out. At that point, and I think even up to this point, you really don't have to have a job because it's difficult. Not many employers are going to say, yes, this person's formerly incarcerated. Come on, let's hire you. It took me a month and a half to get my first job. I mean, Burger King, Taco Bell, McDonald's, no fast food place would hire me. The first job I only had for 1 day and 2 hours. And it was not because anything I did. It was because when I went through the interview process, they never asked me about my felony, and the general manager had an issue with me having a violent offense. And she tried to say, oh, it's company policy. So she was trying to cover her own biases up by blaming the company for having a policy. But a couple of days later, I got a better job working at a restaurant as a dishwasher. This gentleman had never hired anybody that was formerly incarcerated before. When I went in and talked to him, he's like, hey, I see you have a 13.5-year gap on your resume. Can you tell me about it? So I told him my story, and he's like, well, because you were open and honest, I'm going to give you a job. I'm going to start you off at $9 an hour washing dishes. And 3 days later, I was promoted to doing soup, salad, appetizers, because he saw my work ethic. And this was probably, I'd say, my worst boss ever, but also a good boss. He was my worst boss ever because 3 out of 5 days a week, he's cursing me out. And I'm doing everything right. It's just his personality. He's just very high strung. He's going to curse you out just to curse you out. And I'm not talking about like cursing you out like 5 feet away from you. I'm talking about like 1 inch away from your face, spittle hitting your cheeks and everything. And so I had to treat him like a corrections officer. I'm like, yes, sir. No, sir. Thank you, sir. Because I knew if I cursed him out or anything like that, I would be unemployed, and it could be another couple months before I found another job.
So 3 kinds of correctional officers and at least 3 kinds of bosses, no doubt.
Yeah, at least, Jim, I agree with that. David, it's kind of remarkable. You get out, and the adventure you had to overcome is just, I think, is amazing. But then you go down a path where you want to work on prison reform and help other people that come after you make reentry back into society. How did you come up with that? I mean, I think that's fab. That's unbelievable. How'd you come up with that?
Well, I mean, I didn't come up with it because, I mean, people have been doing it for a while. But it's just what's interesting is really the doors that open, because when I got out of prison, I had actually written up a business plan to open up a home for kids and teens to help them get off the streets. And I was going to major in social work. I kind of majored in social work, but my degree is in urban studies, focusing on criminal justice and social welfare. So it's urban studies, criminal justice, and social work combined. And I never was able to do that type of work, but I got involved with reentry work. I got involved with policy work. And it's so amazing, for somebody who's formerly incarcerated to give back and to reach our hand back and to show other men and women what is possible. I mean, I've been out of prison over 10 years now. And it's so powerful when these individuals can see what I've been able to achieve in that 10 years. I am blessed with the opportunity to co-teach a class in prison at a prison here in Pennsylvania through Eastern University's prison education program. And just going in every Thursday and seeing these men, and pouring into them, seeing their hunger for this education is so powerful. But another thing is, I've told them, I'm like, okay, you see where I am at? I want you to be here when you get out, and it's about just encouraging them and letting them know what is possible.
David, I know a few people that you may have crossed paths with. One guy is Mark Howard. He's a law professor at Georgetown University, and he does some work with prison outreach. And he actually convinced my then fiance, she's now my wife, who was a professor at Georgetown University, to go into a prison in Maryland and teach a course. And she was nervous as all heck. And she has these visions of these old 1940s and 1950s prison where she'd be walking down a hallway and the guys are reaching out and catcalling her. But she finally she taught linguistics, language, the science of language. And she said it was one of the best classes, best students she's ever had, because they had like homework to do beforehand and readings to do. And they came in and asked some of the most intelligent questions. And she was very impressed with them. There were certain rules they gave her. She had to dress in very modestly, pants, things like that. But one of her students was Willie Horton. He was the guy, if you remember from, I think, the Dukakis campaign in 1988. They made an ad about him in New Hampshire, whatever. And he was one of her students, but he asked some good questions, she said. And I think you also have an affiliation with Hofstra University, right? Or at least you've been there?
Yeah, I went there in 2018 and spoke at Hofstra, a couple different classes and event. So I've spoken about 60 universities across the country. And it's an amazing opportunity to go into universities, to share my story, to talk from not only the lived experience, but also the experience of somebody who has a criminal justice degree, but who's also worked in reentry and policy. And so one presentation that I created recently, earlier this year, was what your textbooks don't teach you: prison, reentry, and policy. And so I love teaching that class to allow these students to get a holistic view and to know, that your books are teaching you good things, but these are things that you need to know that your books aren't teaching you.
Yeah, that's true.
I came across one last reference, Marty Tankleff. Have you met him? He's a lawyer.
I haven't met him in person. Where we follow each other on social medias. I've never met Mark in person either, but we follow each other on social media. And what's always amazing is, just the connections that you can make via LinkedIn and Twitter and Facebook. And then always when you're able to meet people in person, it just takes it to another level. Like last week, I was at the American Society of Criminology. So I go to some of the criminal justice conferences because that's really what I'm passionate about. And I was actually able to be on one of the panels where we were talking about the trauma-informed parole and probation we're working on here in PA. And so it's great to finally connect with some of the professors that I've been following for years too.
Just to add, Marty Tankleff was accused in the late 1980s in, I believe it was Suffolk County, New York, of killing both his parents. He was 17, put in prison for about 17 years, and then his conviction was overturned. A lot of malfeasance on the part of some people in the system there. But a book was called A Criminal Injustice, written about his whole case, and it's fascinating. He got his undergrad degree while in prison, got his law degree afterwards, and now he works full time on prison exonerees cases. So I consider Marty a friend, and we've done some teaching and things like that together. So yeah, it's an amazing program out there that folks like you are doing, and there are people that they make one mistake and they deserve to have a second chance. Ray, we both put guys in prison ourselves, but we maybe stayed in touch with them. They may have been bad guys early on, but if you monitor their activities, whatever, and they can get out and they lead the straight and narrow. Not easy, but they can do it. David, obviously, a lot of mitigating circumstances with you. I mean,
it really is.
Your conviction wasn't overturned. You admitted what you did. But again, this guy was abusing you for a substantial portion of your life. And to me, it qualifies almost for self-defense there.
Yeah, and just think about that, we were charged with murder. What they could have charged us with was either manslaughter, which would have been 2 to 20 and a Class B felony, or really, if you look at the law book, they could have easily charged us with justifiable homicide, which would have been a Class C felony and carried a 1 to 10 year sentence. We would have been eligible for work release and other things like that, where with a Class A felony, we would never were.
You know, I think it's important as we kind of wrap this up, David, is, you know, and someone that's been through what you've been through, you're a world of knowledge. If you had to give any advice to other victims of abuse, what would you say to them?
One of the main things is if it's in a point where it's happening now, tell somebody. Find somebody that you trust and are comfortable with and share it, you know, because that's the first step to healing. Other individuals, you know, this is a journey, you know, there's going to be ups, there's going to be downs, but healing is possible. Everyone knows the saying, hurt people, but I take it to the next level, and I say helped people help people and healed people heal people. I love being able to share my story because so many people come up to me afterwards and talk about their own abuse. So being able to share your story is going to get to the point where you're able to continue to take power over what happened to you. And then you really get to define how your past is used in your life. But you sharing that will give hope and encouragement and empower other people.
I mean, that's great advice, David, for victims, whether they're current victims or whether they've been victims in the past. I think those words carry a lot of weight, and I hope that the people that listen to this, which are many, that if they are victims of abuse, that they take heed to what you just stated, and I hope that they're able to turn their life around the way you have, which the adversity you faced is amazing, what you've been able to accomplish, and you should be congratulated for that, because I mean, wall after wall, barrier after barrier, you would just not take no for an answer, and you just kept striving. And now the shoe's on the other foot, and you're turning around, and you're helping those that are less fortunate than you, and you're opening the door for so many people that you don't even know about. And I think that's what the great thing is about. I mean, Jim is so right. Everybody deserves a second chance. You know, I don't know about a third, but at least a second. At least a second chance. I kind of want to wrap this up here. I know you have a book coming out. Do you have a date on when that book's coming out?
I don't have a date yet. I was actually just talking with somebody the other day. So we're just in the initial process. So it's not probably like 2 years.
Okay. How about any websites that our listeners could go to?
So my website is davidlgarlock.com. They could go to my website, see different places. I try to keep that updated as far as the different speaking engagements that I'm doing. I actually just solidified a thing where I'm actually going to be a keynote at a social work conference in Alabama in February. And so I'll be back down in Texas, speaking at University of Texas, Dallas, and some schools down there. So one thing I try to do is keep where I'm speaking on my website. So if people are all over the country, they can keep an eye out there. I'm on Twitter and Facebook at David Lee Garlock. I love to connect with people, answer questions. I try to be an open book, you know, and
that's great.
David, last question. I'm sure you've caught up on some movies in the last decade or so since you've been out. Can you offer our advice to our listeners and our audience? What's the best prison movie? What's the worst prison movie?
I definitely tell people to watch Just Mercy because of just how powerful that story is and how it's going to frustrate you. It's going to make you angry. It's going to make you want to throw your remote at the TV, but then it's going to give you hope, you know, that there is a better way, that there is a chance that things are going to get better. I mean, when you think about worst movies, I mean, you think about stuff like The Longest Yard and things like that are so hilarious. They're more funny than anything. I like talking more about like TV shows, like Orange is the New Black. Up until the 5th season, there's a lot of
I agree.
Stuff that could happen, but after that 5th season, it goes like really Hollywood. One show that I loved is Australian version called Wentworth. It's also on Netflix. It has 8 seasons. It's really good. It's more of a psychological type show. But if somebody really wants to see what prison's like, they need to watch the old TV show Oz. That used to be on HBO. It's back on HBO Max now, and you can find some of the episodes on YouTube, but that is probably the most realistic show that's out there.
Is there anything that you would like to add, Dave, to our listeners before we sign off here? Is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, just don't label people by whatever they went to prison for. Just get to know the person, because look at my story. If you just look at the fact that I committed a murder, you could judge me and base your whole opinion on an act that I committed. Brian Stevenson always says, you're not as bad as worse than you've ever done. So I think that's how we have to look at people. We have to say, okay, yes, you did something. Why did you do it? But also, who are you today? And I mean, I always tell people my past doesn't define me. It's educated me. It's prepared me to be who I am today and do what I do. What defines me is what I do today and what I do tomorrow.
I don't think it gets better than that to close it out, Ray.
I agree with you, Jim.
May I do so?
Absolutely, sir.
David, thank you so much. I think your website, davidlgarlock.com. Did I get that right? Yeah, folks, check it out for, I think this will be a great speaker at your different conferences, whatever they may be across the fruited plains, as they say. But everybody else, again, thanks for watching or listening to Cold Red. Check us out on coldredpodcast.com. Follow us on social media, subscribe, all those kind of fun things. And we will be back before very long. Thank you, guys.
Take care, everyone. All right, bye-bye.
Bye.